Ryan Hill for working collaboratively with us. We are continuing to prioritize employee compensation, and we have worked hard to bring our teacher salaries to the market average. We'll be talking more about that in the upcoming work session, but we have accomplished our mission to get it to the market average, but we need to stay market competitive in Fairfax County. We've invested in our instructional assistant salaries. As you know, we have a 3-year plan to bring up our IA salaries to 50% of the teacher BA salary. We did work with this board at your direction to implement the hourly living wage of $15.50 an hour, which was a significant increase. And we worked to give our parent liaisons and regional reps full benefits for those that had worked an average of 20 to 24 hours per week. With our capital investment, we have almost 2 million square feet under construction. We're beginning construction of another 325,000 square feet. And we're working on designing over 1 million square feet. So we are busy, 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 and I appreciate Jeff Plattenberg and his team for the entire lift that they have to do. And as you know, we have a school bond campaign going on for this fall. Facts about that referendum are available in print and on our website. And one thing I'm really proud of too is, of course, in the strategic plan to eliminate trailers, we were able to eliminate the need for 84 temporary classrooms this past year. But we still have, as you know, a significant ways to go. Over the next few slides, just to show all of you some of the wonderful schools underway with capital improvement. Annandale Terrace, there's Bellevue, still underway, their renovation. Clearview Elementary, Mount Vernon Woods, Silverbrook Elementary. We have, for capital improvement, the McNair site that's new, Langston Hughes Middle School, Rocky Run, Herndon High School. I know their front entrance is already finished, still more to do. Oakton High School, still a little work in progress, but moving along. West Springfield was completed, and we got a chance to go celebrate with them just a few weeks ago. A wonderful, beautiful facility. And is that the last slide for all of our schools? So I want to thank Jeff and his team for the outstanding job. Let's give him a big round of applause and his team. So we really are having our folks do a great job. We did some other work to enhance climate control upgrades in our schools. We put hardwood floor resurfaces in our gyms and dance studios and stages, and we repaired or replaced up to 76 playgrounds. So some real work there that doesn't maybe always make it in the slides. As you know, I shared at the leadership conference the 3 E's that I talked about when I first arrived: equity, excellence, and effectiveness for every student. We talked about it again at the leadership conference this year, and leading with 2020 vision so that every student feels seen in our schools, feels respected in our schools, feels included in our schools. And I believe if we keep the focus on these 3 E's, we will reach our goal as the premier school division in the county. I want to thank you, and I want to thank our students who really are why we are here. I talked about the why at the leadership conference, and it really is about making sure we're making every decision around students and student success. And I hope that our public, if they love the opening of schools report and want to learn more, know that we want you to learn more about us and stay connected with us. And here are all the ways. We have the website, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, Instagram, we have our FCPS This Week e-newsletter, we have Red Apple 21, we have our own YouTube channel. So please, I want our folks to know here in our community that we want to stay connected with you, we want to grow with you, we want to partner with you to make a great school system even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand, for a very thorough report. We really appreciate it. There are a few questions for tonight, and then we will have a broader discussion at the work session. Mr. Moon?
I'm going to save all my other questions to the work session, but I just need to ask one question for clarification. Mr. Plattenberg, hopefully you are paying attention to this.
He's not here.
He's not here. Okay, then question may go to Mr. Smith. or Dr. Brabrand, of course. On slide number 26, the last bullet, that I was a little curious about the language used in the bullet, which says eliminated the need for more than 84 temporary classrooms over the past year. Is that the same as reduced number of trailers by 84, or does it mean that had we not taken certain actions, the number of trailers might have gone up by another 84? I want a clarification. If not tonight, you can bring it to the work session, but if you can tell me tonight, that's even better.
So we will have a clarification, and as part of the Premier Workforce Report, we have the exact numbers of the numbers of trailers that we've reduced that we will be sharing with the board.
Okay.
And Mr. Plattenberg is coming and may be able
But
to share.
thank you. I can wait. Just the language, I found it to be a little intriguing.
Okay, we'll clarify it and make sure. And the resource stewardship goal full report, I think, is coming in just another school board session, so we can have full details on that issue.
Thank you.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. This is a really nice presentation.
Thank you.
Overall, I wonder if it will be available. You said it's available on YouTube, or?
Oh, we're going to put this thing out in as many places as possible. We started with you all, but we will be working with Kathleen and Lucy and get it out in as many places as possible.
Okay. So I want to just bring forth a few questions to make sure we can discuss them thoroughly during the work session. With respect to our FCPS on, I've received a number of questions from parents and some mainly parents about how it's happening in the opt-out program and whether they have access to the same apps if they choose to use their own computer.
Okay.
And with the opt-out program, how, I know this is new, so we're just monitoring it, obviously, but I'd like to know how quickly that can happen.
Sure, we can have that. We have a work session, I think, coming up very, very shortly on FCPS on, and I'll be glad to get that information for it.
Right, I know this is real-time information, right? But I think that as we work out the kinks in this program, I think it's a wonderful program, but a number of parents have asked, I don't need this. And so how are we dealing with that, making that, is that an easy transition or a difficult transition? Those are the kind of questions that I will be asking. I saw you, and I didn't note the page, but you talked about new cell phone guidelines. I would love to see the breakdown of that. I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
All right.
And I specifically think that parents would be interested in that, because overall the questions that I'm seeing from parents is that they are concerned, about screen time and how that meshes with what kids are already doing with cell phones. And so I've been talking about how I believe we're trying to teach cyber responsibility, what that looks like, and I would love for that to be a part of some of the communication that we do with the community.
Absolutely. I'll check what we've done already to communicate, and maybe we'll do some additional communication around those cell phone guidelines that we put out.
And then one more bullet in that same communication, you highlighted age-appropriate filtering. I think parents would be very interested in understanding what that means and how their children are being protected by that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And colleagues, I will clarify that we will not have a specific work session on the opening of a schools report, but the individual portions of this report are being built into our various goal reports. And so tonight does give you a great opportunity to ask additional questions. I now have Ms. Schultz.
I'm just going to hit on a couple of things because there's actually a lot, and I'm glad we're on the screen. This is one of my first things because I'm so aware of numbers and data. I'm trying to figure out how we handed out 62,000 plus laptops to 58,571 high school students.
Okay.
So that seems like thousands more laptops than high school students that we actually have. and in particular, because we already had a pilot going in a number of our pyramids, plus subsidies from the state in other pyramids. So it should, frankly, I don't actually know how we're going to afford this, because I thought the number was going to be substantially smaller. So I'd really like to hear about that. And then I think it's a couple screens later, but it doesn't really matter.
I'll get that, Ms. Schultz, for the work
actually,
session.
That's it. That's perfect. So this new library management system, I actually hadn't heard anything about that, that was coming. I'm not aware of what's involved with that. I would like to hear about that. And in particular, Dr. Presidio, I had been asking probably for a couple of years what the access is of parents to understand what their students are checking out of our libraries. If you are a parent on the board, and Mr. Wilson and I are, you know that you can track your food of your students, and you can limit food and no double deals, or they're allowed to buy lunch once a month or once a week or whatever. And so you're very aware, and you can go on and see what your child has purchased, and that's what's feeding their body. But we're not really aware of what our children are accessing in the school libraries. And so I don't know if this is a part of that.
Yeah,
and if it's not,
I'll have information for that when we come back.
If it's not, I would like to hear about that. And then also, I hate to tell you, but I'm not exactly sure what the filters are on these computers. I already have reports of kids watching YouTube, watching Hulu, getting caught up on their Simpsons, all kinds of episodes. Right. So what we're filtering, what we deem, and this has been my problem all along with highlighting some of my concerns about sort of the race to embrace technology into our kind of almost a fundamental ed spec, is what we deem appropriate as a filter may not necessarily be appropriate for parents. And then most notably, and this is a question that I asked previously, but I would like for us to discuss it publicly, is the notion that students are creating content through their Google accounts, what the exposure is, because Google has been fined billions of dollars, not just for, and then YouTube most recently through Google, because Google owns it, not just for violating the privacy of individuals, but for violating the privacy specifically of children.
Okay.
And the fact that parents are not allowed to have access to the information in their child's Google account because of students' quote-unquote proprietary rights to their own information. So I do think because of this launch, I mean, I know we're very excited to talk about it, but I think we need to talk about the breadth of what this implementation has meant. And there was, at some point, there was a slide that talked about the implementation teams, how much has gone into those implementation teams and what the teacher feedback is on how this launch has gone.
Okay.
So those are some of the things that I'd love to talk about on Monday.
Great. When we have the FCPS on, we are bringing a panel. We've seen with the panels that we brought you around other things, equity, student discipline, and the SR&R, that the board has really wanted to hear from people directly on the front lines, and we're planning to do that for this too, and I'll get some of the answers. I will get all of the answers to the questions you asked.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. I now have Ms. Evans.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. This is an excellent report.
Thank you.
Tremendous amount of good news in here, so I'm glad to see so many ways in which we've made progress. I did just want to follow up about Ms. Botang's comments. I thought she spoke very eloquently about an important equity issue. And I did want to give you an opportunity to respond. I'm sorry that she had to leave. She's got school tomorrow morning, of course. But the idea that we have schools where a student would have to go to another school to get a basic math, I mean, it's a high-level math class, but a high-level math class that is that there aren't enough opportunities at their own school. I had a situation like this a couple of years ago where a student needed a high-level math class and it wasn't available, and it was fixed. They added the course. But what is the situation with this? I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
No, sure. You know, honestly, as Kimberly was talking, I was taking notes. This was the first I was hearing of it, and I plan to have our team follow up with her after this meeting or tomorrow or next week and find out what we can do. We don't want students to have to go to other schools to be able to get courses that they need for meeting their needs. I don't know all the details, so I really want to go back and find out the specifics beyond what she shared, and I'm sure we can work to try to rectify the issues that she's brought up.
Well, and thank you for that. I would be interested in the follow-up, and of course, it's not just about one or two students. You know, what we need to look at is this something that's happening at a number of our schools, and I suspect we know which schools would have more of an issue with this. So I hope we can see if this is, you know, again, as a matter of equity and providing the courses that we need to provide at all of our schools.
Right. I mean, I think I agree, and we'll be glad to follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Mr. McElveen.
Yes, very briefly on a couple of these, and I warned you about 4 weeks ago I was going to ask you, so shouldn't be surprised. On FCPS I agree with you that, and I do want to join you in commending Ms. Lofglass and Mr. Presidio for an overall excellent rollout. In 25 of 26 of our high schools, not a single issue, but we did have one high school with issues, and those have been addressed, and I want to thank Mr. Zulaga and others for working with that school on addressing them. But I think it does go back to some issues when we were first discussing this program, and I want to thank Ms. Evans for her advocacy, which I fully supported, and this and other things, which is that we should look first to our communities in need when rolling out these programs. And I do think we had a situation where at TJ, a lot of students saw this as a burden as opposed to a benefit. So I'm grateful to the work that has been done, but we do need to recognize that was an issue with the launch of this program.
Thank you.
Number two, Here Comes the Bus app. We did have some kinks, and I think the biggest kink of all is that it's not accessible to students, who I think would be the greatest beneficiary and user of the app. And I understand that this was meant as a pilot, but I have spoken with our facilities and transportation team about my desire to expand this to give students access to it, because I think it would be of great benefit to them.
Okay.
Next, on the cell phone issue, which others have raised, I am still hearing from students from certain schools that they feel that it's not being, the guidelines are not being implemented equitably. So I do believe we have to look at that, particularly in the Mount Vernon district is where I'm hearing the concerns. And finally, I think on Kimberly's issue, I think it would be very beneficial to the board to get a crosswalk between the various math offerings. Because as someone who went to an IB school like Kimberly, I took IBHL math, and my understanding is that that's the equivalent of BC Calc, and you have the higher level calculus. So I'm not sure about what the difference is between the calculus she's looking for and what we would offer in HL math. And if we are not offering higher level courses at some of our schools, that's a major problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McElveen. Could people please turn off the lights if they don't have any additional questions? Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. I know that we're going to be having a work session and we can talk about things some more, but
No, we're not. We're having, each portion of this will be as part of our goal reports and also on FCPS on. So if you have specific.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, because
Okay, thank
actually
you.
I actually would have preferred that yes, we can break it into our goal reports, but there are things in this report that if we're trying to continuously improve, I would have liked as one board member that we could have had even a 1-hour discussion at a work session about the opening of schools report, because part of, as you build this and you're reporting to the board, how else can we give you the collective feedback and hear from each other about collective feedback on what's meaningful to us in the community and maybe how we might
Sure.
reframe this? So
Well, we'll work with,
Yeah.
listen, I work for the board, and if
Oh,
you
of
want to do it
course.
a different way, we'll be glad to.
again, Dr. Brabrand, none of my remarks are directed at
know.
criticism
I
for you.
know, I know.
This is more for me to share with my colleagues.
Okay.
That I think there's a value to being able to review the opening of schools report, because I think it stands on its own. And for example, I believe it's slide 4,
Okay,
where it's the family engagement survey slide.
right.
So one of the things that I know we always want to tell our good news, but there are things in our family engagement survey that we know we learned from that we want to get better at.
Yes.
And so that chart only gives us the good news chart. So I'm just saying.
No,
that-
that's good. And, you know, I did have, and I did share in my talking points, the 3 growth areas that came out of the survey. I think I hear your feedback, a separate slide that says these were the 3 grows from the survey.
Right.
Okay.
Because, again, for a lot of times the public, the PowerPoint's going to be what they reference
Okay.
to.
Well, we could add a slide in there with those 3 for when we release it to the public. I'd be glad to do that.
It's something to consider.
Absolutely.
So the other thing that I wanted to kind of follow on what other people have shared about the technology piece, and this might be for Ms. Loveglass, and this is where, again, I think it would have been great to have a work session discussion on it, because while Mr. McElveen is saying that we've had a great rollout of FCPS on, as Ms. Schultz has noted, and some of us have been asking, parents are coming to us because this is so new and wanting to feel a little more comfort about the security of their students' identity. And I had Braddock District office hours just last night, and I'll forward the questions that the community was bringing to me, but there were parents still wrestling with what exactly can be tied to their student using the laptop in the school building, then coming home and using it in their home, and now the IP addresses being drawn from both at the house with their family computer and the other computer. So, and then there were questions about also parents being able to see and identify the sites that their children would be visiting.
Okay.
And then there was also concerns that people were saying that when we had the bring your own device option, parents could then load the software that FCPS had as part of their contract onto the people's devices. But now that we've gone to the laptop, we're issuing the one-to-one devices, we're basically saying if you don't want an FCPS device for whatever personal reason you've decided against it, you can't get access to the FCPS software. And so that's going to be, I think, a key question that people want to understand why we changed that.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, to my colleagues, you should just know that we've always been sensitive to fees that we put on families, whether they used to be athletic fees and the activity fee, and now there's the technology fee. And one of my families at the meeting has 3 children in high school. And so that's $150 a year times, the 4 years for each of that child. And they said, our family could end up with a really nice laptop within 4 years, and instead it's just, so I think there are some things we have to help explain why we're putting those fees there. And I know, Ms. Loveglass, you and your team have worked extremely hard to sort of answer a lot of the frequently asked questions, but we're still probably needing to get a little more clarity around there.
We can do that.
The other thing, I just did want to use this opportunity to say again that I am so appreciative of you and Mark Greenfelder and your work with Project Momentum and everyone involved with Project Momentum. Earlier tonight, some families made remarks and concerns about where is FCPS going in building up our schools. And are we wanting to break up neighborhood schools and bus children out of their schools? And nothing could be further from the truth. And as someone who is a second generation Fairfax County family in the same neighborhood that my husband started in kindergarten, it worries me and saddens me that anyone out there thinks that this school board doesn't have that same value. So when we look at Project Momentum, that is the proof of what Fairfax County is committed to. Project Momentum means that we are looking at all of our schools and how can we build them up? How can we make each and every school stronger with strategic investment of supervision and time? And it is an excellent example of how FCPS is saying we have 200 schools, let's build each and every one of them to be successful, and it doesn't mean about breaking up neighborhood schools. So just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Because after all these years, we talk about how do we successfully address achievement gaps, and you and your team are doing that. And yes, can we get better at how we do that? Absolutely. But thank you
You're
for
welcome.
that strategic effort that's being done under your leadership.
You're welcome. You know, I will say our principals, as I go out to visit, continue to feel that the OS team and RAS coordinated together is the biggest breath of fresh air they have ever had, and it has gone from just being a few schools to something that we're saying system-wide. Every school needs support. Some schools need more support than others, but everyone does. And when you bring in instructional experts, people are willing. We're creating conditions in the school for people to listen and learn together and really elevate their game and create a professional learning community in each and every school that really elevates student instruction and ultimately student success. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. I would note that we have never actually done a work session on the opening of schools report, but I think it's an excellent idea to bring it to a work session going forward. It's just one that we have not had traditionally on our calendar. We do have on our calendar, scheduled for the 14th of October, a robust discussion on FCPS On, where we'll be able to address many of these questions that have come up tonight, as well as a discussion on Project Momentum and school accountability on that same
That's right.
day. And so I think that's excellent. I don't have anybody else. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Derenak Kovacs.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Brabrand, for this. I appreciate some of my colleagues have expressed my comments. I agree with Ms. McLaughlin about the slide that happens to be up there, the glows and grows like you have to. I think that's important.
We'll add that.
I think this presentation is important to go out, so I'm having a meeting with my presidents or their surrogates of the PTAs in my district.
Okay.
And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving a little version of this. So any help that your office can give me to give a shortened, condensed version of this, I would really appreciate that with highlights to have a shorter presentation.
Sure, be glad to.
I think I would be remiss not to comment on the comments of our student rep in response to this. As Ms. McLaughlin said, we have made so much progress in so many areas, but the conversations that we saw and when we talked about two Fairfaxes and what that brings, I want to remind my colleagues one of the primary reasons we started FCPS On was to address the digital divide, where people did not have access to computers or to the internet enough in their schools or in their homes. It was to address that. For some strange reason, equity has become a word that's fearful right now. Equity means, like you always talk about, addressing children by name and by need, and making certain that every child is able to study their passions and be able then to graduate in that portrait of a graduate mode successfully in order to do that. I specifically know about Lee High School because I represent that district. As you know, Lee is an IB and AP high school. So, Mr. McElveen, I'm pretty sure I have the answer on that, is at a certain level, if you start at advanced math in the IB curriculum, you max out before your senior year. And so the multivariable calculus is an accelerated course that Lee does offer from time to time, but obviously with 2 students just taking it, it was probably cost prohibitive for that principal. So we need to talk about that when we talk about equity. How can we pod these kids together? What can we do? How can we get them to a site? Very similar things happened to my daughter, not with that particular class, but another thing. And I'm a parent whose daughter just graduated 2 years ago, not 20 years ago, so the same problems were happening then. I speak that less to you than to the public out there who, as I said, equity is something that we as a school, we are a public school system. Education is a great equalizer, and that is what we want to do. We want to give the children, every child, every opportunity that they need in order to be a successful, productive member of this community. So I thank you for this. I look forward to the updates on what we're going to have, and Marcy, I saw you shaking your head to help me promote this and spread the word to the schools in my district. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Derenak Kofax. So I will take the chair's privilege of the last word. Once again, thanking you for an excellent report. There's so much data in here.
We tried to make it, yeah.
It's robust. It has a lot of really meaningful data, but it also leaves us wanting more, or to have more clarity of some of it. And so just want to ask a couple of questions,
Okay.
And then provide a brief comment on, to follow up on Ms. Derenak Kofax's comments. First question is regarding your hiring and the need for the challenges you're facing in hiring teachers with a decline in numbers of students graduating with a teaching degree.
Yes.
How are we ensuring that we have the ability to attract and retain the most diverse workforce, one that actually reflects the makeup of our county? And then what are we doing to ensure at the building level that we are also having a diverse workforce in the building?
Right. I mean, this is definitely an area that's been a board priority. It's in our strategic plan. We're doing some additional surveying of our principals around our hiring practices that we have changed. And one of the things we did is we centralized hiring for our teachers. We required at least 3 candidates for every position. Part of what we need to do now is go back after really a year of doing this to see, as we shared in the Goal 3 report, where we've seen growth in hiring and where we still have room to grow. And we need to do that school by school and region by region. Some of our schools are doing great jobs at bringing in diverse teachers and hiring them and retaining them. Other schools, honestly, as you've heard even from your advisory committee reports at the end of last year, are still struggling to create the conditions. That welcoming and culturally responsive environment matters to kids, but it matters to staff too. And people want to see a diverse workforce, a diverse set of peers, so that they feel a connection, that they feel fit in. So a lot of that is working with our Dr. Ivy and our regional assistant superintendents to follow up with them now to see what they're still struggling with in their practices, where they've done well and where they can still do better to really go out. One thing we are doing is more aggressively going out in the community, going to these fairs and saying we want you, and growing our own kids. The grow our own teacher courses, the kids in those programs are far more diverse than the current labor pool. Mm-hmm. I want to remind you one other thing that Virginia has done. They've moved from a 5-year requirement to get the teaching degree in Virginia that was done several years ago back to 4 years. So we're hoping in the next year or two that we're going to be able to accelerate the number of our young people you got to go before you had to go an extra 5th year to then get a job that salary-wise isn't as high as some others. So we're really trying to make sure everywhere we're lowering the barriers to entry and really accelerate it. But we have work to do. It's really going back school by school, region by region, and celebrating success where schools are doing better, and then helping schools work with them to create the kind of culturally responsive environment necessary to bring in a diverse workforce.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand.
You're welcome.
Another question is regarding Project Momentum and the impact it's having on some of our Title I schools in particular. I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Greenfelder and the Region 3 staff, and I was incredibly impressed by the real progress that a number of our schools are making in bridging the achievement gap. I was a little surprised that we didn't have anything in here about some of that bridging the achievement gap, because there are individual schools, for example, Fort Belvoir, that bridge the achievement gap by over 22 points, I believe. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct. And the exciting thing to tell you is that this board, I believe it's going to be our next board meeting, we're going to have a Excellence in Equity Awards program that we've created. You know, the governor's had their VIP award program. That's nice. But we in Fairfax can celebrate our own growth, and we are going to be bringing you dozens of schools that have seen excellence in equity, that have closed gaps or seen through an equity lens everybody growing across all subgroups. And that's going to be probably over 40 schools that you're going to see. And I think, forget when it's scheduled. Is it, Dr. Ivy, do you know?
It's scheduled on October 24th.
October 24th, just a month from now. And you're going to get to see face-to-face and hear and see schools that are already outperforming sometimes what have been expectations that were too low for groups of kids. So we're really excited to share that with you in just a few weeks.
I would even say they're outperforming the nation, because I had the opportunity to be at the Georgetown Law Center this past week, where a presentation was presented on the iceberg effect and the impact of standardized tests and accountability systems that only look grade by grade and don't look at the growth overall. And so I'm very excited that you are doing that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Then my last question along the same lines, you had a chart where we have a couple of schools that are facing challenges with dropout rates.
Yes, ma'am.
And I had an interesting conversation with your staff about that, because the dropout rates are not what we would traditionally think of as being a problem in Fairfax County. We've actually decreased dropout rates significantly over the past 10 years, but this is an anomaly. Can you unpack that a bit for us, or should we wait until the Project Momentum?
I'll say this. I think if, in the traditional sense, we've done tremendous work to lower dropout rates. What we really have in some cases is an age-out rate. We have kids that come right at the end of their educational career with little formal education, and they're struggling to jam in a 4-year time. I don't care who you are. And yes, you can slide and have a 5-year cohort. But to come in and try to get 12 years of school in just 4 years is a tremendously difficult thing. We're doing it at rates better than almost anyone in the country, but there's still the tension that some of our students have to try to catch up all of that work when some of them have true financial hardships for themselves and for their families. So it's a careful balancing act. We're doing our own problem of practice on it right now. I'm talking to the state superintendent. Dr. Greenfelder will actually be going on behalf of Fairfax County Public Schools and some staff to share with the Virginia Board of Education this issue, because I think we need to more carefully look at whether this indicator is truly telling the picture to the community in the correct way. And we're doing tremendous work with these kids, but it's trying to, again, jam in just a short period of time, 12 years of education. We've got to figure out a way to give them more time and to give schools credit for the progress these kids are making. And it may be merging some out-of-the-box ideas. Part of it is economic opportunity. They need a job and they need school. And sometimes some of them are choosing to drop out because of the job, not because of anything that is going on in that school or that teacher. They love the teacher, they love the school. They've got to pay the bills. So we got to figure out a better design, and we got to figure out a system in the Commonwealth that does not penalize schools, that welcome all kids of all backgrounds and say, come and learn. So we're going to work that out, and I'll be glad to report on that in a future work session.
Wonderful. I look forward to hearing it. And so finally, I just want to thank you because this has been an excellent report, and I look at this as the beginning of a conversation that we've had many times about fulfilling the FCPS promise for every child. And by disaggregating data and unpacking it, it allows us to see where we need to focus our resources to ensure that the FCPS promise is realized no matter where a child goes to school in this county. And so I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chairman, just
Yes,
one-
Ms.
I
Schultz.
just one quick go back, because this slide happens to be up, and we happen to have talked about this in our 2x2s. I do think it's necessary for the transparency of our organization to not only address the glows. And on this particular family engagement survey slide, I would love for us to pair this with, these are the excellent things that we learned by initiating a family engagement survey. And this is where we're going to do the work.
Yes.
And the work is clearly from families telling us they feel separated from what their children are learning. So this is very good news, but this becomes transparent, and we pursue accountability when we talk about the places where families did engage with us, where they want us to meet them, where we haven't met them. And that is really in the middle of that engagement survey. And I think most of my colleagues and I know I've spent a lot of time with the region staff going through very detailed information on performance at an individual school level in our respective regions. But the disconnect is between families and what their kids either are learning or supposed to be learning. And so it's much more fair, in my opinion as one board member, for us to own where the gap is between expectations and where we're not quite meeting them. So I would love for us
Sure.
to, in the future, show
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Paul Harvey rest of the story.
And as I was saying to Ms. McLaughlin, I have those talking points that did the grows, what I need to do, and I certainly agree with you. We can put the glows and grows up on this family engagement slide so that there's the transparency. I talked about it tonight, but some people won't hear this. They're only going to look at the slides, and they want to see the other piece of where do we still need to get better. And I'll add that slide before we communicate it out to the community.
I appreciate that. I think you've heard that from a number of board members tonight.
Absolutely.
So I don't think there's any disagreement in adding it.
Thank you. Thank you all. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. It's going to be a great year. It's off to a good start, and we're looking forward to engaging you in the work sessions that come up in the fall. And before you know it, we're going to have our first budget session to talk about where we want to even go, and we have to begin planning for next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we come to the portion of the meeting where the board will confirm actions taken regarding issues that were discussed in the closed meeting. These issues may include action taken regarding student disciplinary matters. Board members have discussed each individual case, and at this time will make several motions to confirm the recommended action. I now call on Mr. Moon for a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to excuse from attendance at school certain students identified in closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code Section 22.1-254B1.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. McElveen. All those in favor? Ms. Strauss, Ms. Schultz, Ms. Hines, Mr. McElveen, Ms. Derenak Kofax, Mr. Moon, Ms. Keys Gamara, Mr. Wilson, Ms. Evans, Ms. Corbett Sanders. Those opposed? Those abstaining? Ms. McLaughlin? That motion carries. I now call on Ms. Derenak Kofax for a motion.
I move to authorize legal counsel to settle potential litigation according to the terms and conditions discussed in closed session.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Schultz. All those in favor? Ms. Evans, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Moon, Ms. Derenak Kofax, Mr. McElveen, Ms. Hines, Ms. Schultz, Ms. Strauss. Oh, I'm sorry. She had already. Now that motion is unanimous. Thank you. That motion carries. The board will now consider whether an amendment should be included in the fiscal year 2020 to 2024 capital improvement program. I call on Ms. Strauss for an amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move to amend the FY 2020-24 capital improvement program by including Langley and McLean High Schools on the list of priority recommended boundary adjustments as noted on page 46 of the CIP.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. McElveen. Ms. Strauss, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you. The inclusion of these schools would allow staff to begin the scoping process this fall. And it's important to state that any potential boundary adjustment will be discussed and decided through a transparent process that fully engages the community. In the current year CIP on page 66-67, those maps show that if no action is taken, by 2023, McLean High School will be the most over-enrolled, and the neighboring school, Langley High School, will be the most under-enrolled school. Now, this fall, more trailers came in to McLean, which indicates that the overcrowding situation is continuing at McLean. We must have a plan for addressing the growing overcrowding at McLean High School. There are other schools in the county that are overcrowded, but all the other high schools have a plan as to how they're going to move forward. McLean does not yet have a plan, and certainly we've heard loud voices from the community that we need to have a plan. First of all, McLean is a constrained site, and it does not easily accommodate a growing trailer village. If any of you have driven through the campus, you can see it is difficult for the students to get to the trailers. It is difficult to place any more trailers. It is causing, obviously, a burden to students and to teachers, but it is a fairly untenable situation. What is interesting is the beautiful renovation and expansion of Langley High School is now complete. Therefore, that building is now ready and able to invite more students. It is interesting that this juxtaposition of one growing overcrowded school right next to one under-enrolled school, both trends going in those directions, it does suggest the need for a boundary adjustment. In this year's CIP, it does include a variety of things that we've been watching over the years. We've been watching the growth in the Tysons area. For a while, it was fairly flat, but clearly at McLean High School, that is no longer the case. It is definitely growing. We have looked at and have taken advantage of many of the other suggestions that the CIP has in dealing with overcrowding, reassigning instructional spaces, interior facilities modifications. We've done that a couple of times, including this summer, creating more science labs, et cetera. Obviously, more temporary classrooms, and of course, the school board passed a resolution when we adopted our CIP with the goal of reducing trailers, not increasing trailers. And obviously, hopefully tonight you will support the movement of beginning the boundary process, particularly where we have a capacity surplus right next door. The community also has asked that as the long-range plan is an addition at McLean High School, and given the Tysons region, this is likely something that we also will need to consider. Certainly, trailer villages, as we've all agreed, is not the solution. So I do ask my colleagues to support this amendment. And again, there will be, if this passes, there will be meetings for all interested community members from the McLean and Langley community to come together. The community's input will help make the decisions as to what the boundary change would actually be, what we would do with grandfathering, what we would do with the timeline. It is the community at the table with us that will help decide what the plan will be for McLean and Langley. I do ask for your support tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. Mr. McElveen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am very grateful to have this opportunity to second this important amendment championed by Ms. Strauss because of what it means for the McLean community that I call home. I commend Ms. Strauss because as soon as our superintendent asked for board members to raise boundary hotspots for consideration in July, she immediately brought forward the overcrowding issues at McLean. No other issues in the county were brought forward by other board members at that time. Everything we do impacts our children and our community, but nothing impacts them more directly than boundary decisions. For almost 2 years now, this board has paused boundary changes until we could review our boundary policy. Unfortunately, this pause has led to a failure by this board to address boundary issues as they have arisen in the community. And McLean has been where this failure has most clearly manifested. Tonight, instead of waiting for our next capital improvement program, when it will be adopted next year, we will address that failure now. In this McLean overcrowding debate, a game changer came on January 28, 2019. It was not a protest, not a petition, but rather a newspaper article. Many of you likely read that article in the Guardian newspaper entitled, "Virginia Students Learn in Trailers While State Offers Amazon Huge Tax Breaks." With the publication of that article and the images, disturbing images, of McLean's trailers, McLean High School became the poster child of American school infrastructure decay. The only problem with this article, it took a newspaper from the UK to notice the problem and call attention to it. Where has the Washington Post and our local media been? Why have they failed to call attention to our issues of school overcrowding and decay in Fairfax County? Our media has been completely absent, reflecting a decay in local journalism just as concerning as our decaying infrastructure. Contrast that to 1950. It was that year when Agnes Mayer authored a series of investigative articles in the Washington Post that showed the socioeconomic inequities and racial segregation in the schools in the Washington metropolitan area, most specifically, the disturbing conditions of schools in Fairfax County, with students studying in boiler rooms and elsewhere. Her articles led to the passage of our county's first bond for school construction on May 31st, 1950, which amounted to $10.5 million to support alterations to 40 existing schools, as well as the construction of 11 additional schools, including the school in which we sit now, the county's first high school for African Americans. We are faced with a similar situation today, yet our challenge is far, far greater in scale. It is a crisis, and this crisis reflects years of failed leadership from county and state elected officials who have forced us to economize until we bursted our seams. Our trailer parks, like those at McLean, are symbols of the biggest crisis facing Fairfax County Public Schools since the post-World War II population boom. And many of us on this board have been sounding the alarm about this crisis for years. The primary difference between today and 1950 is that at that time in our history, Fairfax County's leaders were able to muster the courage and fortitude to stand up to their funding authorities for better school facilities. In 1950, the county's population had just doubled in size over the past 3 years, increasing from 40,000 to 80,000 residents. Fairfax County was holding elementary classes in boiler rooms, in partitioned auditoriums, and reclaimed cafeterias. The post-war growth was only accelerating, and they already had 77 temporary classrooms that housed 2,200 students. Sound familiar? The school board, along with their superintendent, was willing to admit they had a problem on their hands. Had Superintendent Woodson and the school board not taken that heroic step of issuing the first school bond in Fairfax County history, our school system likely would have collapsed. Over the coming 2 decades, from 1950 to 70, The student population grew from 17,000 students to a staggering 133,000 students. The speed of our projected growth today is similarly uncertain, but we know that with the expansion of the Silver Line and housing growth in Tyson's Corner, our population in the McLean boundary will only increase. Instead of reclaiming farmland for single-family homes and crafting a suburban landscape, now our county is building upward, and all the while, it appears that our leaders lack the courage or foresight to properly plan for it. That is why it falls on our community and our school board to call critical attention to this issue. If 77 trailers housing 2,200 students was unacceptable to Fairfax citizens in 1950, why is a number more than 10 times that amount acceptable now? Today, we have more than almost 800 trailers housing almost 20,000 students. Let that sink in. We have now more than 10 times the number of trailers and students in trailers than we did when Fairfax County embarked on its greatest building spree in history. That is a travesty, an embarrassment, and it is unacceptable. But where is the countywide outrage? The newspapers aren't covering it. The news stations aren't here tonight. The leadership, and yes, the outrage, must start with us. I applaud the McSpaces advocates in the audience, the students that have come before us, and the community that has stood up for McLean. I now call on other Fairfax County residents to do the same for our entire community. With tonight's boundary change process for McLean Langley, this board is beginning a drumbeat on behalf of the residents of Fairfax County to our funding authorities at all levels. On behalf of our students and teachers, we must no longer tolerate this intolerable facilities crisis. It would take another $97 million per year to bring FCPS in line with industry standards of a 25-year school replacement cycle and eliminate all of our trailers. And let me be clear, this investment would not take into account the $50 million that is now needed for major maintenance, a number that will continue growing exponentially if it continues to go unaddressed. We, this board, has been sounding this alarm for years, but it takes the media, it takes community advocates, and it takes funding authorities to help us move forward. Boundary changes are a start, but they will not solve all of our problems. As a start, I ask my colleagues to do what we are able to do and to support Mrs. Strauss' amendment to bring relief to the McLean community tonight.
Thank you, Mr. McElveen. Ms. Keys-Gamarr? Oh. Ms. McLaughlin? Could you turn off Ms. Keys-Gamar's light then?
Thank you. First of all, Mr. McElveen, I appreciate the history lesson about Fairfax County as a former college history major, and the fact that my husband's family moved here in 1971 from New York, escaping the congestion and traffic and everything that came from their life up in Long Island. And when they bought their house in Annandale, just outside the Beltway, the reaction in D.C. was, "You're going to live all the way out there in Annandale and come into D.C.?" So much has changed. But one thing that I do feel very appreciative of the fact that this county has had growing pains over time. When my husband's family was here in the 70s and early 80s, it was not uncommon that a single household with 4 children could have those children go to 4 different high schools because the growth was so explosive. They just kept trying to build more schools and figure out how to take in all those family homes and neighborhoods, and it was a bit bumpy. But then things settled down by the 80s, and Fairfax County did become, again, one of those places where people felt like they could understand where your children started in kindergarten, where you were going to finish up in your high school time. Where this relates to now is that there's no doubt we, as a board, as Mr. McElveen has stated, we have more trailers than this board wants to see. And in my 8 years on the board, I fully acknowledge that many of us up here have talked about the fact that we've got to find solutions to the trailers. And when we have limited funding options, working with the Board of Supervisors and trying to figure out how do we raise the cap on the bond. Mr. Moon, you've certainly been an advocate for that. And the board has gotten some incremental funding. But in the meantime, what we have here tonight before us is an opportunity to look at a recent renovation that has enabled us to have a neighboring school with empty seats. So as a board, when and how a proposal comes to us, one thing that's in my mind is, who are we trying to serve? We're trying to serve the children. And if I have a proposal in front of me that enables children to be able to get out of crowded hallways and trailers and into empty and open seats at a neighboring school, which the community certainly already has relationships with one another through swim teams, through other sports teams, recreational, all of that. To me, this is an opportunity to serve our families. So I know there's a lot of questions about there by others trying to make this bigger than it needs to be. To me, it's just very simple. I've got some empty seats in a brand new renovated school, and I've got a way to be able to help children get out of the crowded trailers and hallways. So, Ms. Strauss, I do want you to know that because your two schools have an opportunity for a very easy and appropriate fix, whereas Mr. Plattenberg and Superintendent Brabrand explained at our last meeting and also at the work session that some of the other high schools that absolutely have overcrowding out west, but they're due for renovations. And what I know from hearing families is that if you've got a school on the horizon for renovation and you might be expanding those schools, don't go adjust the boundaries before you figure out what you can do with the site and getting more. So it's a good proposal you've put in front of us, and I am very supportive of the fact that we can start something as early as 5 months sooner to bring relief to the families and the children who are asking us to do the right thing.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Schultz?
Well, I've never ever heard before that we need the media to tell us to do our job. That's a new one. I don't need a newspaper to tell me whether one of my schools is overcrowded. That's the job of the board. I'm stunned when I do the calculation. Not that McLean isn't a serious issue. It's been a serious issue. It's been CIP after CIP after CIP. You wouldn't know it because for years I've advocated for the CIPs to be matched together so that you could see what would happen from one year to the next. For example, this year the CIP happens to state that McLean is 114%, and in 2023, 2024, it's going to be 126%. This year, Centreville High School is 120% with 124% in the out years. But last year, those same two schools, Centreville was still 120% last year, and it was 128% in the out years. So it suddenly dropped. I'm not sure why. McLean was 109 and 122. But Chantilly is also in the 109 to 118 category. Centreville High School is one of the smallest campuses. It has far many more trailers and modulars than does McLean. I just did the calculation because I don't have any room between Centreville and Chantilly. They're roughly, for people who don't know the western end of the county, 3 or 4 miles down the road from each other. Centreville High School and Chantilly High School combined are 908 students oversubscribed than McLean. So I have almost 1,000 more children in high pressure, overcrowded, north of 110, 115, 120, 128% now and in the out years. And the notion that, well, it's planned for a renovation, it's not on this year's bond, it's not on a bond in 2 more years, and it's on a bond in 2 more years after that, with construction starting sometime after that, meaning that Centreville High School will get relief in about a decade. Telling a community, you've got to wait a decade, but we're going to slide somebody else in, I don't understand when we're getting ready to start our CIP discussions in about 75 days or 80 days, why we would architect one solution. And the other concern I have is that I think that we're creating a false sense of security, that we're just going to, and this question was asked very directly at our work session last week, are you just going to move students from McLean to Langley? Is it a one-to-one solution? Stop shaking your head, Ms. Strauss, because the answer was no from staff. You cannot guarantee that the process is going to move students directly from McLean to Langley. And in fact, if we go forward with the draft of the proposal of the new boundary policy as is, that would not be supporting diversity and equity in Fairfax. And in fact, if I lived in an island of the McLean boundary that was to the western end or to the southern end that is not in the contiguous McLean boundary, I'd be very worried that, in fact, that I would be subject at all to staying either at McLean or moving to Langley at all. And unless this board is going to say, we are putting this amendment to say we are going to move students from McLean to Langley, period, and stop, which is, of course, not our governance, but neither is this. So what difference does it make if we're going to violate our standard procedures and how we operate on an annual basis with our work calendar? Then go ahead and put it in the amendment to say we're going to move 10% of McLean to Langley and reduce McLean by 10%, increase Langley 10%, and then assure the community up front that the scoping that is a part of this amendment, which has nothing to do with what the actual solution will be, and the actual solution will be effected in a subsequent board not constituted as these 12. You are not getting a solution. You're getting a promise of a solution that is going to be layered underneath a boundary policy that has been so heavily rewritten as to be unrecognizable, not written by anybody at this table, not written in accordance with our governance manual through our governance committee, but written by staff, delivered to us, completely unfamiliar and never engaged with the public. So I don't see how I tell my community, you have more trailers, you have more modulars, you are more overcrowded, you're mysteriously not as overcrowded this year as you were in last year's CIP, so now we're going to move somebody ahead of you and jump the line instead of having a holistic solution. But, you know, this is what happens when we are manipulating our process to achieve a purported outcome that is not, in fact, an outcome. It is only a scoping, and I am very worried for a community that is similar to mine that I don't represent, that you're going to wind up not getting what the promise is at the table. It's a promise of a promise, and in the end, we aren't engaging the community up front. We're not engaging the principals of the schools that are affected. We're not engaging the staff. And we certainly haven't had enough conversation at this point to slide this in, and it's not an actual solution. You need an actual solution.
Thank you, Ms.
Not the promise
Schultz.
of one. Oh, that's okay. I haven't hardly spoken all evening, but please do feel free to cut me off. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. Mr. Wilson.
All right. In a perfect world, I would love to be able to approve and support this proposal. But unfortunately, that's not possible for me. Now, I'm going to start by asking a couple of questions. The first one is for our clerk. In January, was there an amendment put forward to the CIP to start the boundary scoping process for McLean High School?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Can
I
you
would
check?
have to look it up. January, you're saying? One
Well,
of the board
yes,
meetings?
that's when we vote on the CIP, in January.
Okay, go on with your business, and
Can
I'll
you
let
check
you know.
to see
I'm
whether
gonna
there was
check it right
amendment
now.
put forward? Mr. Plattenberg, if you were to begin scoping, assuming this amendment is passed tonight, when would you be able to expect a boundary transition to occur? What's the earliest you could accomplish that?
Well, like with any of them that we identified in the CIP, it does, and what Ms. McLaughlin said is it advances approximately 5 months. Depending on the feedback we get with the public and the community input that comes back and informs the board and board decision,
we could effectively begin it, have it completed, I believe, by next year. But I will double check that and I will provide it in writing. I think we discussed this in the work session as well.
Well, that may be the case, but so you're saying it would be potentially effective in the school year 2021, 22? Is that right? 19, 2021? Okay. So, Madam Clerk, do you have the answer to that question yet? I can, I don't recall for sure, but we did get an email from Ms. Strauss saying, I'm going to propose a CIP amendment for McLean High School. And it came to the board, and it was Ms. Strauss and Ms. Palchik. Did that actually come before?
It's the January 25th board meeting, and you can look it up on board docs. I could email.
So we voted on that proposal?
On specifically McLean?
Yeah.
It's a very long amendment.
Was it part of the amendments that we voted on?
Mr. Wilson, can I suggest, this is a question you asked about Mrs. Strauss having put forth an amendment. Maybe you could ask her that question.
She can answer it too. We don't typically ask questions of other board members at the table, but Ms. Strauss, if you want to answer that question, that's fine.
No, we did not vote on that amendment in January.
Okay, so you sent around an email to the board saying you were going to propose an amendment for McLean High School with Ms. Palchik that proposed exactly the same thing we're talking about right now, and it did not come to a vote because I guess you ended up not bringing it?
It did not come for a vote.
Okay, so in March, we received a letter from the McLean Citizen Association, and in that letter was a resolution that asked the board to initiate a boundary study and complete a boundary transition as soon as possible, but not later than school year 21-22. They specifically asked that it be completed 21-22. Now we're talking about 2021, as suddenly the urgency has changed. In September, yesterday, I received an email which included McLean Citizen Association correspondence that recommended that we accelerate action on the boundary change that would level the capacities of McLean High School and Langley High Schools. And overcrowding at McLean is a growing problem that undermines both the quality and the education of safety of our students. I would remind the board that the only reason the overcapacity rate at McLean High School is higher than these Western County high schools, including places like Centreville, is because Centreville has 14 modulars and another 8 trailers. 1,000 more students, almost. Lastly, I think that I want to point out that it's been presented that this was the result of a conversation where we were supposed to bring hotspots to the superintendent. And in fact, in July 22nd, the superintendent said, quote, I will bring forward the list of hotspots. I will let you review it, and you will let me know what ones you want to move forward with. You all can decide which ones we want to wrap into the normal CIP annual process this fall around boundary adjustments. We do have a normal CIP process. It's not rolling. It's not rolling admissions. We talk about it when it's proposed to us. The next one is going to be coming in probably 75 days. The first 2 weeks of December, we receive it, generally speaking. That proposed CIP will be with us very soon. We can base this decision because somehow the 2 months or 2.5 months is going to save us 5 months, but I think we're kidding ourselves. I do want to agree with something that my colleague said about the media, because I agree that there is a lack of appropriate media coverage for this board. But what it's missing is what's actually happening, which is, in this case, and I've said this before, and people didn't like it when I said it, but it is true. What we are doing is a corruption of our own process for the benefit of a single board member during the end of the CIP year, when we could discuss all of our schools as a board in December. This board's action tonight provides another example of the board's willingness to dispense with the ordinary process whenever it chooses. In this case, the board is leapfrogging McLean High School above other schools experiencing severe overcrowding at the request of a single board member. The proposal to amend the CIP has the goal to level the school capacity at 2 schools that are among Fairfax County's most affluent school communities. I posit to my colleagues, if instead of Langley School, it was Justice High School, would we be doing this? If those 2 schools were swapped, would we do it? I don't know, because if we would, why can't we have this as part of our conversation on boundary changes? The proposed amendment is made despite the fact that the next CIP will be provided to the board within 60 to 90 days, at which time the board will discuss all capital improvement matters within the context of balancing both needs and resources. The proposed amendment flies in the face of more than 1 year of work by this board discussing the boundary policy to incorporate One Fairfax into the current boundary policy. The rush to approve this CIP change demonstrates that this board is not comfortable having the uncomfortable conversations when it comes to the boundaries at McLean High School and Langley High School.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I now have Mr. Moon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank my colleague, Mrs. Strauss, for bringing this for the board's discussion and the vote this evening. Thanks for being persistent in your desire to represent your district and your community and advocating for your students and parents and other members of the community. As I had said a number of times, when this was first brought up back in January, I supported you. And you considered at the time actually bringing an amendment to a CIP, and I was going to support you, but you chose not. You are wiser than I am, and you have more experience than I do as a board member. But even with a little less experience on my part, over the course of 20 years as a board member, I know when to bring and when not to bring, when to push and when not to push. For something I want to bring to the table, I always count the vote. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get the number of votes wrong. Sometimes board members change their minds at the table. I understood why you wanted to bring it, but why you chose not to. You needed 7 votes at the time. And when you don't have a 7 votes, sometimes you might want to wait a bit, find a better time to do it. And you have certainly found the better time to do it. You've been able to talk to other board members, had a more opportunity to be able to convince others to join you. I have been consistent with my support on your effort on this, and I'm happy to do it again. My dear colleague from Sully District just talked about this motion being just benefiting one single board member. We don't just do this for one single board member. I am doing this for more than 2,200 students going to McLean High School and all the families being affected by our decision this evening. If this were about Justice High School, would I have done it? I would have done the same. It wouldn't matter to me whether this was McLean or Justice, Annandale, Mount Vernon, Oakton, Centreville. If a board members, other district board members or at large brought other proposals for my consideration, I would have given a due consideration and then vote my conscience. But board members have chosen not to bring other things for the board's consideration. But Mr. Strauss, you have done it. And I respect that, and I'm going to support you. I'm going to support you very happily with wholeheartedly. One thing, I know you are retiring at the end of this December after 26 years of service on the board. And I know that this was something that you wanted to be able to accomplish before you retired, and I respect that. And I want you to be able to accomplish that. As far as bringing community to the table for scoping and timeline, of course, we need to bring the community for scoping and timeline for decisions. But I do what I want to see out of that scoping and timeline, the ultimate outcome to be to find the solution, remedy to alleviate overcrowding situation at McLean High School, and that become effective come August 2020. I'm happy to support you again. Thank you, Mr. Strauss.
Thank you, Mr. Moon. Ms. Derenak Kofax. Oh, sorry. Board members, those that do not wish to speak, could you please turn your lights off? Thank you. Ms. Keys-Gamarra? No, she's got a second. You haven't spoken.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. I just wanted to, I know we heard a lot of strong words, and my understanding is that Centreville High School is already included in the CIP. Is that correct, Mr. Plattenberg?
Well, it's identified in the out years for the CIP, but as was stated earlier, with every school that we've had issues where we have overcrowding, we do interior modifications, we do science lab adjustments, and we've done it at Chantilly, we did it at McLean for some additional science labs, and we also did some conversions in computer labs to classrooms at West Potomac, and also at Centreville we did modification to a number of rooms, and we're also doing additional modifications. But yes, to answer your question, it is, Ms. Schultz did say it was in the out years, and that is, of course, when we bring the CIP, that's certainly something for consideration that the body can take a look at as we do it annually.
Thank you, Mr. Plattenberg. I just wanted to clarify because a lot of work happened between January and now, important work. When I came on this board and I saw these administrative boundary changes, I was concerned that the interpretation of 5% of students being impacted often led to unintended consequences, which is something that I know among a number of other board members, discussed with our superintendent, which led to the statement that the superintendent made. During the course since between January and now, we've had a number of work sessions and discussions and public meetings trying to fix a problem that wasn't intended to be a problem. It was intended to be a convenience, but since my time on the board, have seen us move students from one school to the other thinking that it was going to fix a problem, and we actually created a problem. And so that it is smart to recognize when we need to stop and reset the leg so that we can walk straight. And that is what I believe has happened between January and now, and that is the difference, Ms. Strauss, between your submission of your request in January as opposed to now. We've had a lot of discussion, and while there has been a policy that staff wrote that this board did not accept, the process of those discussions actually led, I believe, to a greater understanding so that we can go forward in a healthier, more transparent way, which was my goal in the first place. I noticed the reference to Justice High School, and yes, they had a renovation that Ms. Evans told me in 2004 prior to my coming on the board, but they're also in the process of getting an addition right now. And so I've had an opportunity to visit the renovations. I was at West Springfield, we were there together. Beautiful building. So there's lots of things going on across Fairfax County, And I didn't want the public to get the wrong impression from some of the statements that we've heard. There has been a lot of work by this board, a lot of discussions since 2018, at 5 work sessions that I'm aware of, and it was about creating a more transparent, I believe, and open discussion because, as our superintendent noted, the way that we were doing some of these administrative boundary changes was actually problematic. And so that is the difference between January and today as far as I'm concerned. So, Ms. Strauss, I just wanted to point out that, it's not simply an exercise, but there's been a lot of work that all of our colleagues have engaged in, even those who are objecting today. And I think that those were important discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kiesgemeyer. Ms. Hines.
Yes. So this is also, I believe, the 3rd time we have discussed publicly this one amendment, right? When it was new business a couple weeks ago, we had a very lengthy discussion of it, which is unusual for us to do that for new business. And we added it to a work session, and now here we are again. So I think if I were someone from the McLean community watching this, I might be thinking, when will these people ever get out of their own way and vote on this, right? Because I feel like we keep hearing the same things over and over again, and really all we're doing is something we've done many times in the past, not in recent years, but it's something we do, something we're good at. We're just going to open a public, transparent community conversation about the McLean High School overcrowding situation, noting that right next door there is a school with hundreds of empty seats, which is why we think this is a great opportunity to have a boundary discussion. But we're not writing a prescription for McLean High School. We don't owe them a prescription. We owe them a conversation. We owe the community an opportunity to have that conversation and decide what the right thing to do is with the school board and with the school system. So this is nothing new. It's overdue for the McLean community. Thank you very much to Mrs. Strauss. And I would just say, to those board members who are worried about schools in their own districts, I represent the Hunter Mill District, and when I heard in our meeting that we would have an opportunity to bring any red flag issues to the superintendent, I looked back at the CIP just to check, and I said, well, and I actually sent an email out to my community after doing that and saying, actually good news for the Hunter Mill schools. We don't have any overcrowding anywhere that we don't have a plan for. We do. We have a plan everywhere, and we're managing everywhere that we are. So when I look at what Ms. Strauss is asking for, and I look at the situation in McLean High School, to me this is just kind of a no-brainer, and I feel like we've already spent more than enough time talking about it, and I would like us to just vote, actually.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. I have Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Schultz, Mr. McElveen, and then Ms. Strauss.
I just wanted a quick go back because when everyone is speaking from their position and perspective, I worry again about what this leaves the public to be thinking about. And as we know, doctors are told as part of their oath to do no harm. And when I look at this situation that we're voting on tonight, and I think about where the community would be, take out the 12 personalities and 12 perspectives sitting up here, the public would look at this board with its responsibility and say, you have a chance to allow children starting next fall in September of 2020, not September of 2021, if we were to follow the guidance of, well, our normal process is this will be something we'll look at in a few months, we'll vote on it in about 4 or 5 months, and by then the window has closed and we would have to wait a whole nother year before we can take advantage of hundreds of empty seats at the neighboring high school. So I am voting with absolute confidence tonight that take away some of the concerns about process and normal practice. I believe the public will judge this board on saying you've got an opportunity to move kids out of trailers and crowded classrooms to somewhere next door where there's empty seats. The other areas of the county where we have overcrowding problems that people have spoken very well to tonight, we don't have a neighboring school to be able to move them right now by September of 2020. That's the reality. So I'm going to basically step away from a solution to help some of the 190,000 students that live in this county. I don't think that the public would have any respect for this board turning away from a clear solution that moves kids out of trailers. It's, to me, that simple.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Schultz.
The notion that, and Dr. Brabrand has heard this from me, so this is no surprise, the notion that Centreville or Chantilly or problems in the western end of the county have not been brought as a hotspot. I haven't counted the hours of videos between our CIP discussions last year, our discussions in March, our discussions in July. It's no surprise. But I'm going to refer to our own historical CIP documents. This is a CIP facilities need document from November of 2014, concerns. Centreville High School has been significantly overcrowded for a number of years. Due to the recent and projected leveling of enrollment, it doesn't appear that the situation will grow any more severe. Over the next 5 years, it's projected to have a deficit of 398 seats, 400 seats. Currently, the school has a deficit of 389, so perpetually 400 seats. This is not something that's new. It's been a hotspot for a very long time. In that same document, McLean High School. There are 5 elementary schools within the McLean High School pyramid. This year, these schools actually show a decline in enrollment of 40 students, which is much greater than projected. The projections indicate that over the next 5 years, enrollment will increase by 139 students, not 400 students, resulting in a capacity deficit of 249 seats. So this hotspot has been in existence for a very long time and deserved to be brought by our professional staff, as I have identified, not this CIP cycle, not the previous one, but the one before that, the one before that, the one before that, the one before that, and the one before that. The policy could have been brought, and I have asked for staff to bring us innovation, whether it's open enrollment, to allow parents to move their students out of a crowded school and out of trailers. That's an innovation that is missing. To allow a school to languish for 10 years before there's relief, and really 10 years plus, now we're going back to 2014, and it already said years. We're now at maybe 20 years. For 20 years, we're going to let you languish, and we'll get around to you when, I don't know what, when the staff brings it. I'm disturbed by the quote by my colleague who said, well, we had the opportunity to address this in January, but there weren't 7 votes. What's happened between January and now that there's suddenly 7 votes? McLean's no more overcrowded now than it was in January, or before that, when it was overcrowded in the fall when we were talking about the CIP, or in the spring before that, or in the fall before that. It's been a persistent problem that needed a solution for a long time. But suddenly, there's 7 votes 6 weeks before an election. I find that amazing. Interior modifications were referenced being done at overcrowded schools. They're clearing out workrooms at Centreville High School to create educational space. That's a travesty when you have as many trailers as they have. So the problem that I have is that McLean has deserved a solution for a long time, but it's been a problem for a long time. We haven't had an emergency created, and the notion that 75 days from now we'll all of a sudden lose an entire year, well, my answer to staff is make up the 75 days and get it done. Not, well, oh well, we missed our window, we can possibly deliver a solution if we wait for the regular CIP that our superintendent quoted to us in July that the hotspot list was going to come back to us, and we were going to discuss it as a board, and we were going to work it into our annual CIP process. That is when we develop trust with the community, that the community knows we are going to solve their problems. We're going to elevate the most serious problems to the top. We're not going to neglect one community over another, and that we're going to start solving problems as they occur. The fact that administrative boundary adjustments came to a grinding halt 18 months ago, we could have done an expedited boundary study, we could have opened enrollment, we could have created a change to the percentage that's in our adjustment policy. There's so many options that were on the table, and that it's this last-minute Hail Mary that looks like we're going to create a solution for a community that nobody has said. If you want to change that amendment to say we're going to move students, we guarantee we're moving students from McLean to Langley, then change the amendment and say it. Because otherwise, you're creating a false promise to this community that staff has not said, and if you guarantee it, you're rigging the process up front. So we've rigged it to get 7 votes tonight. We've rigged the process and not guaranteeing this community that they'll have the solution that you intimate that they're going to have.
Ms. Schultz.
And that's, oh yes, Ms. Schultz, yes, let's not, we'll talk about straws and tampons and everything else, ad infinitum, but this is important. This is the thing that matters to families. Trailers have been a problem that have been created over 20 years, but by goodness, let's not discuss it tonight. Let's cut off discussion because this isn't important.
What I was going to suggest to you, Ms. Schultz, is that you have obviously, over the past 2 to 3 meetings, been passionate about Centreville and some of the schools in the Western region. And Chantilly. And we appreciate that, and I hope, that the superintendent has heard that as part of the upcoming CIP discussions. But Ms. Strauss's amendment is what is on the table tonight. And so I very much appreciate your passion for Chantilly and Centreville, but let's go back to the discussion of Ms. Strauss's amendment. I have Mr. McElveen.
That's okay.
No? Okay. With that, I have Mr. Wilson, and then I'm going to finish with Ms. Strauss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a couple of quick points. One, less than 6 months ago, McLean Citizen Association told this board in written correspondence that the goal was as soon as possible, but not later than school year 2021 or 2022. I don't see what's changed since then to make this a suddenly urgent priority at the top of the list. Our decision, whether it's to do mid-year budget decisions to pay for items, or apparently now a rolling CIP if there's something that some board member wants to push through, it prevents this board from balancing needs and resources in a conversation between various options. That's why when we have the CIP process, I think we have a public hearing. Sometimes more than one. This process, however, doesn't apparently deserve that, and we have no way to compare it against other schools and in a discussion with the superintendent and the facilities. It's just one person convinced board members. She didn't call me for support, but when I proposed, the conversation, let's talk about Centreville and Chantilly, everybody says, well, they're taken care of. They're in the CIP. But it just gets tabled. So this board is rushing this unnecessarily, and it's doing it in a manner that is completely against its own process. And I again remind everybody that the 2 schools that we're talking about are probably the 2 most affluent schools in our county.
Mr. Wilson, I never saw an amendment from you regarding the CIP, but if you had brought one, I
actually, the last time we discussed this here, that night, I sent Although the superintendent said he was going to bring us the list of hotspots, I then that night sent an email to him with the hotspots, which then were brought up at the next work session. But of course, no one wants to join that conversation because this is about Ms. Strauss and her school and the McLean Citizen Association, apparently. And,
Thank you very
and
much.
I think that that's the media issue that's not covered. Is let's understand why this is happening more than three quarters of the way through the CIP year.
No. So let's continue on. I have the last word from Ms. Strauss, and then we're going to take a vote.
Thank you. First of all, this language of the boundary amendment that I have proposed, I've said to include Langley and McLean High School on the list of priority recommended boundary adjustments. Several years ago, there was not capacity at Langley because they were undergoing renovation and expansion. Now that that work has been done, there are vacant seats that have already been paid for. A boundary adjustment does not cost any money. So that is an important piece to consider. The other part is that when we sit down and work this through, there will be a discussion of grandfathering. I don't want to strike fear into the hearts of students who are already in high school and are looking to continue to finish where they are. There are some other families who very much want to begin the change now because they're very concerned. So again, the community will discuss grandfathering. It is unusual to have this amount of capacity available in the neighboring school. It is also important to remember that every student in the county deserves the resources and attention that they need, regardless of socioeconomic status. Yes, many students at McLean and Langley do come to school with many wonderful advantages. I'm very proud of those schools. My own children attended McLean High School. So they deserve respect and support. And the taxpayers certainly deserve us to make use of the beautiful building that is now there and ready to absorb more children. All of the surrounding schools that are adjacent to McLean High School are either full or over capacity and projected to grow in enrollment. Therefore, there is no other opportunity to resolve the McLean overcrowding by moving kids somewhere else. And I certainly do not propose upsetting a lot of other schools and cross-busing. The school next door that has capacity is Langley. And again, do not propose moving anyone out of Langley High School. Langley needs more students. It is important that we use some of those vacant seats. If we don't, Langley High School will lose more staff, and it will be difficult for them to actually continue some of the treasured programs, particularly world languages, advanced math, advanced science, that the families expect in that school. And again, those students deserve quality education, just like every other student in the county. So I do ask for your support. Thank you.
Call the question.
And with that, I'll call. Sorry. Are you calling the question?
Yes, I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor of the amendment to the CIP as stated by Ms. Strauss? So we have Ms. Evans, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Mr. Moon. I'm sorry, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, Mr. McElveen, Ms. Hines, Ms. Strauss. Those opposed? Mr. Wilson. Abstaining? Ms. Schultz. That motion carries. Item 5.03, the award of contract for the tennis court replacement at Robinson Secondary School has been pulled off of the consent agenda and moved to the, I'm sorry, it was off of the new business and moved to action for this evening, and I call on Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. I move to approve the issuance of a change order to the ATC Corporation in the amount of $141,714.50 for additional work for the replacement of the Robinson Secondary School tennis courts, and authorize the Assistant Superintendent, Facilities and Transportation Services, or designee, to execute, deliver, and administer the change order, as well as the contract as so modified on behalf of the school board.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Schultz. Ms. McLaughlin, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, to my colleagues, it was brought to my attention this afternoon from several families within the Robinson Secondary community that Fairfax County Public Schools is in the process right now of renovating the Robinson Secondary tennis courts. Regrettably, they ran into some challenges with the renovation effort, and so we had for tonight on new business this change order to the contract to get the additional funds so they could finish the replacement of these courts. If we were to wait 2 more weeks, as it was scheduled, and be an action item 2 weeks from now, it would very much prevent the necessary work that needs to be done during this warm weather, and it could severely impact the entire tennis season for the Robinson team. They would not have courts available to them for their practice and games. And so I brought this issue to our Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Plattenberg, as soon as I was made aware of it. I also spoke with our General Counsel, Mr. Foster, to make sure that the board has the legal authority to move a contract like this from new business to action item for this evening. This is something that's very important, obviously, to the Robinson tennis players and their families. It's through no fault of the school that this additional work needs to be done, but this will be very meaningful, especially as we know children only get 1 year in their lives each time. For our Robinson seniors in particular, this is very important. And so I appreciate very much the support of Mr. Plattenberg in saying that this is in the best interest of the project and for the students and the community. And I do want you to know that ideally we always want to give as much notice as we can, but this was something that we just became aware of today. I appreciate your consideration and support. I would hope we would do this for any of our schools where we have a chance again to improve things for our students. And certainly hope you will ask any questions you need in order to gain your support tonight so we can help out our student athletes.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Schultz?
I don't have anything to add.
Does anybody else have anything to add? Mr. Wilson? Ms. Strauss? So with that, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. The motion carries. Item 6.03, the award of the contract to the George Mason University for the Elementary Professional Development School Internship Program beginning with 2019-2020 school year, and authorize the Director of the Office of Procurement Services to execute, deliver, and administer the contract on behalf of the board. Board member has asked that to be moved to action versus, so we can discuss it. And so I now call on Ms. McLaughlin for a motion.
Thank you. The award of contract to the George Mason, I move to award the contract to the George Mason University for the Elementary Professional Development School Internship Program beginning in 2019-20 school year. And second, authorize the Director of the Office of Procurement Services to execute, deliver, and administer the contract on behalf of the school board.
Seconded by Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Ms. McLaughlin, would you like to speak to your motion?
I would. This had been on the consent agenda, and in reviewing it, there's definitely some questions about this 5-year contract. So, yes, I am making the motion to bring it to the table because it had been consent, and I think it's important that it be an action item for discussion before the board. But I may not even vote in support of it this evening, depending on the information we are able to obtain tonight from the division. And in fact, if necessary, I hope other board members will listen and review this, that whether or not we need to postpone it to the next business meeting on October 10th if additional information is needed. Because as you'll note, this contract calls for Fairfax County Schools to pay George Mason University roughly $166,000 a year, each year for 5 more years. So this is a notable contract, and I think there's more clarity that we need. Just as a matter of process, Ms. Chair, I don't know if I should start asking my questions or let my colleague, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, speak to her motion and then ask the questions.
Why don't you go ahead and pose your questions, and then Ms. Keys-Gamarra can pose hers, and then we will let Ms. Pratt respond to it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Pratt, as someone who myself went through a master's degree program where I had the field practicum or the field internships as part of my diploma program, I know that I was placed into government settings to get that experience. When I read this contract, it was a little difficult to understand why, if Fairfax County Public Schools in this agreement is offering its sites and its schools for the students to be able to come in and do their field internships, why in fact would we be paying George Mason University when in fact we're actually offering them field placement opportunities? So I would like to get a little more clarity on why we're paying them when in fact we're actually providing the learning opportunity. Plus, as I read the contract, our own teachers would serve as mentors to these interns. So again, I think there needs to be a greater degree of understanding of why this is costing Fairfax County Public Schools money.
Okay. I think, you know, in just the principle, it's a paid internship program. So these George Mason students are coming to us and being paid to serve in our schools. My understanding is those interns are essentially subbing in some cases in classrooms, and the division is therefore really saving money. As I did the math, these interns are paid a stipend of $450 a month for 10 months, and there's 37 participants. So if you multiply $450 by 10, $4,500 by 37, you get the 166. So if I looked at what we're paying a substitute teacher at approximately $14.50 an hour, in the cases where those interns are serving as a sub, we're actually saving money. Does that help?
Well, I appreciate you providing context. It doesn't really help my comfort level because I can tell you in my 2 years of graduate work, and I worked 3 days a week in the Circuit Court of Prince George's County and then Fairfax County Juvenile Court, I wasn't paid anything. I was just paying a lot of tuition to earn the degree and earn the practicum hours. So it's surprising to me, unless this is a unique program that is different from a diploma program, even if it's a certification program, again, I'm trying to understand, we're providing them with the learning experience they need for, is this a certificate that they're going to earn at the end of it? Is it helping them get a diploma from George Mason? But why we would pay them, I've never heard of people in graduate school as part of their, whether it's a degree program or a certification program, that they're getting paid while they're actually interning and learning. But again, maybe this is a different concept than from what I experienced with my master's program.
So I can add a little bit to that. A PDS program is a unique program where we bring interns in to work in our schools. As a matter of fact, in 1999, when I was an administrative intern myself, at Graham Road Elementary School, it was a PDS site. We had a partnership with another school at the time. And at that time, the model was to have an on-site facilitator who was actually a teacher in Fairfax County who was working for the university and was doing quite a bit to mentor teachers, do team teaching with teachers in classrooms. Models have changed a bit over time in those 20 years, but again, we do provide those stipends to teachers because they do take on those subbing responsibilities in classrooms. And speaking to human resources, at this point, the average is those individual teachers are subbing in classrooms 30 to 45 days per year. It's also a great recruitment tool for us in Fairfax County. I know that when I was an assistant principal and a principal, many of our teachers that we hired in the system were indeed PDS teachers who were quite comfortable with the work that we do in Fairfax County and had been brought up essentially in the Fairfax County way. So in addition to providing those substitute opportunities in classrooms, it is an opportunity for us to recruit for the school system.
Mr. Smith, I appreciate that. But when I read the contract, our own employees are serving as mentors. They're doing quite a bit of work. Are we giving a stipend to our teachers who now we've added onto their workload? Are we giving any funding to them at all? Because I'm struggling to understand why, again, we're taking our, general fund dollars that $166,000 a year could allow us to hire at least 2 new teachers, and instead we're paying students who are getting their education, and I'm not hearing any money's going to even our current employees who already are telling us that the workloads are much higher. So the program is still unclear to me. Who are these 37 interns? Are they getting a bachelor's degree in teaching? Are they getting a master's degree? Are they getting a certification? What actual program are they in that?
It's a degreed program for them to get certification or degree in education. So there's a facilitator in the sites who receives a stipend for facilitating the program and working within classrooms to support that work with teachers. And our teachers who are working as mentors, as I believe, and I don't have all the information, but I don't believe that they're receiving any additional
yeah, in fact, not to cut you off, but I actually think when I read the terms of the contract, it showed that the professors who are the university facilitator, the UF, they will be getting, the part of the contract is that they're doing some work with the site supports. So again, I don't want to belabor this. I know it's a very late hour to my colleagues. I would say I think that the board should be getting more information when you look at this commitment over 5 years. I don't think there needs to be a rush that we vote on something like this tonight. The board has taken a more intentional role at understanding contracts over $100,000. I'm very appreciative of George Mason University and the fact that we, as you noted, Mr. Smith, that we value the prospective graduates that come from their program and come to teach in our schools. There's no doubt there's a lot of good intentions from this contract, but I certainly have more questions before I feel I could support it this evening. So I really do appreciate that you all are kind of getting put on the spot to speak to it, but I also think that Madam Chair, as maybe a going forward, this might be one of those where we needed a little more heads up from the superintendent on a contract that's over $100,000, and especially one that we're committing over 5 years, to draw the board's attention to review it before because it's on a consent agenda, so it wasn't even something that allowed for us to have the discussion.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra, would you like to speak to your?
Yes, I think I'll just pose more questions. It sounds like this has been an ongoing contract, so I'd like some clarification on that. One of the concerns that I have is that it only states that the $166,000 is for the first year. It appears to allow adjustments of what those costs are for the following years. So I'd like some clarification on that. I'd also like to know what it comes down to in terms of what we are paying folks to give them the opportunity to be mentored by our staff members. Certainly, we appreciate the benefit of them coming into our schools, but they are receiving training. Do they have any, if they have that opportunity, do they have any obligation to give Fairfax County schools the first consideration, or are we using this sort of the way we would use Teachers for Tomorrow? I guess I am equally concerned as Ms. McLaughlin to make sure we're getting a good bargain here, because I do think that our staff members are investing in the folks that are coming in our schools. So I'd like to know, are there other similar programs? How does this compare, in other words, from other agreements between school systems and colleges? So I did feel, as I glanced at it, that it could be that I'm not accustomed to looking at these kinds of contracts, so I did feel as though I wanted more information.
Ms. Pratt could give you some information about the contract itself.
So you're right, the program has been in existence for several years as far as I know, but obviously with our desire to increase transparency and maximize scrutiny, or maximize transparency and increase scrutiny on contracts, we've brought this to you this year. This came to me in July. We negotiated with George Mason to get the provisions accurately completed and brought it to you the first we could 2 weeks ago as new business and tonight on consent. So specifically to the pricing, there is a provision that allows for the funding or the firm fixed price amount to be modified next year. My understanding from my working with HR is that that's determined in May of the previous year to determine how many interns would be part of the program and to figure out what the price would be. It would be mutually agreed upon by both parties, obviously in writing. And so I think what I've heard in the past from the board is the desire to see those modifications the following year.
What does it work out to that we're actually paying them to give them the opportunity to work with our staff hourly?
Well, it depends how many hours they work per week, I suppose. I mean, if you did the math by 40 hours a week, it was like $3 an hour.
I understand, but we have a fixed amount that we're paying.
Right.
Do they have a fixed amount that they're giving us in terms of service?
Monetarily?
No, in terms of hours.
I don't believe so, but I can verify.
And I think I mentioned I would love to understand how this compares to what other jurisdictions are doing. I mean, I actually agree with Ms. McLaughlin. Sometimes we do get a stipend, but I actually may be a little sore because I think Mason charges us too much for graduations. But I just want to make sure that, I mean, if there's not a fixed number of hours that they're giving us, but we have a fixed amount that we're paying, that actually makes me a bit more concerned.
I think Dr. Brabrand has a comment on this part.
So the spirit of this is definitely transparency. This is about contracts and transparency. The PDS concept, as Mr. Smith said, has gone on probably 20 years. So this is a 20-year relationship we've had. A contract this board's never seen that we're bringing to you. You have more questions. It seems to me that it would be to continue to work on the whole purpose of this, the transparency to share, is we can get you some additional information if you choose not to vote tonight, or include it at a work session if you feel you need additional, or simply just information in the BB around the contract to get the questions that the board has answered so that you feel comfortable that this is an investment of the school board's fiduciary responsibility, and you're getting what you expect, and it's aligned with our strategic plan goals. So we can do that for you in the manner that you would like to do.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. Mr. Moon?
Most of my questions have been answered already. And in fact, earlier today, I sent in a number of questions. I got responses from staff, among which I consider to be important is this is a 20-year partnership. This is nothing new. And as Dr. Brand stated, we are seeing this for the first time because board asked a more transparency with the contracts we signed. That is why you were bringing this to us, and we are seeing this for the first time. My question to you is whether we have those pre-service GMU students already placed in our schools doing their year-long, if you call this internship already. So they are already in place in our schools. Because contract calls for starting date is July 1 and ends on the June 30th. So July 1 is almost 3 months ago. So are they already in schools?
Yes, so we have placed those individuals in schools. Again, it's a contract that we've had for many years and are bringing it to the board in greater transparency, but we do have individuals who are placed.
Already placed. So those students expect to get paid on a monthly basis. And I mean, it is then my assumption that by the end of this month, they will expect to get paid. They are students, college students, or graduate school students, correct?
Yes.
And you're gonna pay them even without the board's approval of this contract? Or you're gonna just delay the payments?
So George Mason is paying, and I will let Ms. Pratt explain how the contract works for paying.
I see. We reimburse the George Mason once they send us an invoice on a quarterly basis.
On a quarterly basis, that's
Okay.
right.
Okay, so it may not exactly be at the end of this month. It could be another couple of months. Okay. So that answers one or more important question. They are already placed. And could you just refresh? Could you just restate what you said about number of times the students who are placed in our schools, number of times of substitute assignments they perform?
Yeah, so it's for the full-time teachers, and this is based on 37 full-time individuals, and on average between 30 to 45 hours, or 30 to 45 days
of substitute
per individual, yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
There was also a question, if I may, about what our mentor teachers are receiving. And so George Mason does provide training for those mentor teachers, and many of our mentor teachers see that as a professional development opportunity that they do not have to pay for individually for themselves, but they do see it as a professional development opportunity where they're able to hone their skills and also reflect on their practice as a teacher.
Okay. Could I ask you just a follow-up question on that one, just for clarification? So George Mason provides a training